Hello and welcome to GameSack. Today we're talking about some more games that push hardware limits. You know, games that do more with the hardware than originally thought possible. They push hardware limits. So enjoy watching this episode about pushing hardware limits while eating some pulled pork. Get it? You know, pushing hardware limits while eating pulled pork, push and pull? No? Okay, so let's get away from that joke immediately and into the first game. The year is 1990, and you're at home with your brand new $400 Neo Geo and your nearly $200 copy of Cyberlip. Hell yeah, life is great because this is the real arcade game in your own house, not a watered down port. Contra can get wrecked because there's no way a run and gun could ever be this good at home. Hell, it even got an ad with a hot lady being ignored by the American Psycho himself playing Neo Geo and listening to Huey Lewis in the news. But then your friend comes over. Is it your friend from next door? No. Down the street? Nope. Your friend is from the future, and he brings with him his nearly $4,000 copy of Metal Slug 3 for the Neo Geo. Wow, this game sure makes you feel like an idiot for ever thinking that Cyberlip was good. In fact, it can be tough to believe it's the same console. This is a run and gun that totally blows away Cyberlip in every area. This game might have some of the best 2D pixel art ever created. As with all Metal Slug games, there's a lot going on here. You almost always have multi-layered backgrounds full of color. The enemies are many and the screen is often full of chaos. Of course, the nearly $4,000 copy of Metal Slug 3 for the home system doesn't have blood, so you're gonna need a way to play the cheaper arcade version, which otherwise is the same. And that makes this zombie stage so much better. In fact, you can get turned into a zombie. When you do, you can use a special attack that fills the entire screen. And the animation is some of the best ever seen in a 2D video game. They sure didn't cheap out on the dying animations. You want that famous Neo Geo scaling? Well, there's a little bit here, like when these aliens spin around. Better than nothing, I guess. You even get fat if you eat too much food, which of course makes your bullets fat as well. Naturally, the bosses are huge, multi-segmented, crazy things which look incredible. There are tons of memorable and extremely impressive scenes in this game. But you might say, hey, Cyberlip has branching paths! That makes it way better than crappy old Metal Slug 3! Well, Metal Slug 3 also has branching paths. They're just handled much more seamlessly than Cyberlip does it. There are also many incredible weapons to use, and almost all of them are fun. You even get to play part of the game as a horizontal shooter. Is that not good enough? Well, you get to play part of it as a vertical shooter as well. That's still not good enough? Well, you even get to swim and shoot things as debris is falling on you from above. There's just so much going on everywhere in this game. Even the sound is excellent and full of energy, with mostly top-notch sound quality. Seriously, you'd be absolutely blown away by this game if you were able to play it when Cyberlip was the hot new thing. If you told a Neo Geo player back then that this game was running on the Neo Geo 2, they'd believe it, and they'd also think that the Neo Geo 2 was way more powerful than the one they had, which was running Cyberlip. Metal Slug 3 may or may not be your favorite game in the series, but when it comes to the Neo Geo, I feel that overall it's the most technically impressive in most areas. So do yourself a favor and ignore all of the reasonably priced compilations that this game comes on. Get yourself $4,000, a Neo Geo, and experience this game today. Here's Road Rash on the original Game Boy. This motorcycle brawler started life on the Genesis, and it ended up on all of the different platforms, except for the ones that it didn't, which was most of them at the time. The only Nintendo system it arrived on was the Game Boy here. And for a Game Boy game, it puts on a pretty good show. The object of the game is to come in third place or better on each track, beat up the other racers if you want, and avoid crashing your bike. This version feels a little slow compared to the original games, but is still quite responsive. The road is full of hills and it adjusts its perspective as you go left or right. The objects aren't extremely choppy or anything. Hell, even the sky has clouds that give the illusion that they're moving as you travel forward in most stages. The Genesis simply wasn't powerful enough to have forward-moving clouds, but it's on the Game Boy here. Stupid weak-ass Genesis, why do you even exist? When you get knocked off of your bike, you can run around in any direction that you want. though if you do this for too long, you're probably going to lose the race. But here it is, a Game Boy game that lets you run around in 3D space. The graphics aren't totally perfect though. Eagle-eyed gamers might be able to spot some differences if they see it side by side with the Genesis game. Take a guess, can you tell which is which? Well, did you guess correctly? Still, this version is plenty fine for what it is. The music is pretty simple, but I'm sure there are more than a few people who likely prefer this version of the music compared to the more twangy Genesis originals. There's not much more to say about this one other than what else I have to say. Most of the game is here. Win all 5 tracks, move on to longer tracks, buy faster bikes, and all that. For a version of Road Rash on the go, it's pretty good. It's not as good as the Game Gear version, but at least you can play it longer since the Game Boy doesn't eat up batteries as fast. So if you're in the back of your parents' car while they're driving across the country on a vacation you absolutely don't want to go on, this is the version of Road Rash that I recommend you bring with you to help keep your sanity during the whole ordeal. I was pretty amazed when I finally got around to playing this next one. I didn't import it initially due to how oversaturated the title was in the media at the time. Anyway, check it out. It's Street Fighter II Champion Edition for the PC Engine, also known as the TurboGrafx 16. This is a one-on-one fighting game where the objective is to beat up your opponent before they beat you up. Pretty simple, and I'm sure we all know how these games work. Sadly, this was only released in Japan, because why would we be graced with such an excellent port on the TurboGrafx or Turbo Duo? And this is an excellent port. Most of the graphical assets in this one are based on the Super Nintendo version of the game. Need I remind you that the PC Engine is a wimpy 8-bit console that has absolutely no business among the mighty 16-bit giants like the Genesis and Super Nintendo? Well, this game made it its business, and even shows them up in some ways. This one was originally being planned as a combination HuCard and CD game. That's supposedly the reason the game comes in a dual-sized case. But NEC and developer Capcom decided that they wanted everyone to play this no matter if they had a CD drive or not, just as long as you lived in Japan. Remember how R-Type on the PC Engine had to be divided into 2 parts because the HuCard could only hold 2 megabits? Well, this game says, "Screw you!" and comes on a HuCard 10 times the size of that. Everything that can be expected to be here is here. This is the Champion Edition of the game, so that means the 4 boss characters are selectable. The animation certainly isn't as good as the arcade, but it's still plenty good. The characters are large and there's rarely any flicker. When it does happen, it's only the shadows that disappear briefly. You probably won't even notice. Since the game is based on the Super NES port, that means it runs in letterboxed mode with rather large black bars. But since the 16-bit ports of this game all do the same thing, you certainly can't hold it against this version. It's just a weakness of the Super Nintendo itself that just kinda transferred everywhere else. The backgrounds all look great, and it even has the cool line-scrolling floors to give it some depth. The ceiling even has some line scrolling in the final stage. Look at that, you don't mess with the PC Engine. About the only thing that's missing here are the overlapping layers of parallax scrolling. But really, even the mighty 3DO has this exact same issue. At least the PC Engine has an excuse. Stupid 3DO. As a result, the much beloved fence in Zangief's stage is missing. And the floor seems to slide under the elephants in this stage. But you know what this game does have? Better colors than the Genesis version. Keep in mind that the Genesis is a proper 16-bit system and it even has blast processing. Yet it gets outclassed in the colors department by the older PC Engine here. Even the sound is impressive. The music sounds like the pleasant buzzes and hums that the console usually does, but that's really not a complaint at all. It sounds nice. And the voice quality is excellent. In fact, they sound way better than the voices in the Genesis version.
You win! Perfect! You win! Perfect!
And you know what? I'd say they sound a little better than the Super Nintendo voices as well. They sound less muffled, though maybe a bit more quiet.
Round 2, fight! Round 2, fight!
There are also more voices than the Super Nintendo version, at least the first one released on that console anyway. There are even a couple of different 6-button controllers released for the console to let you play the game properly. They work great for the most part. I don't think anyone expected this port to be this good back when it was first announced. Sadly, I had to wait over a decade to finally play it, but you don't have to. This also happens to be the best portable version of this game for the time if you had a PC Engine GT or a Turbo Express and an adapter. I'm glad that the console was able to do this game justice and show everyone that it's not as weak as many people probably thought that it was. Here is Batman Returns for the Sega CD. Holy crap, who knew the Sega CD had games that took actual advantage of the hardware? I've covered Soulstar on the Sega CD in a Pushing Hardware Limits episode, but I believe that Batman Returns here needs to be discussed in the series as well. We won't be looking at the horrible platforming sections that are on the disc. Thankfully, these can be turned off, and nobody should ever play them. They don't deserve to be played. But these driving segments, oh man! Your goal here is to kill all of the enemies in a stage within the strict time limit. Almost everything on the screen at any given time is being scaled, rotated, or both. It really made use of the Sega CD's built-in extra features. In fact, this is one area where Western programmers absolutely outclassed their Japanese counterparts, which was a very rare thing to see happen in the 16-bit era. In Japan, they never really got a handle on the scaling and rotation features, as you see here in F1 Beyond the Limit from Sega themselves, which came out a year after Batman Returns. This was as good as Japan was ever able to do with the machine's scaling and rotation abilities, and it's not a very pretty sight. But in Batman Returns, everything is balls to the wall nuts. I mean, look at these buildings. They have sides on them. They're not just flat sprites that move towards you. And no, they're not just drawn that way. The sides change perspective the closer and further you move laterally. That's right, these are 3D buildings. Well, they really only have two sides, a front and the side that's closest to the road, but that's still extremely impressive. Even the road itself is scaled and it looks great, with excellent hills and curves that don't look weird at all. When you kill an enemy, their vehicle parts fly everywhere and they land on the road, and each part has its own scaling and rotation applied. All this, and there's never any flicker anywhere. That's because the Sega CD really has no limit at the amount of objects it can put on screen in this manner. It will only slow down, but never flicker or tear. Not games that run in this mode. The only thing being handled normally are the scrolling backgrounds. Well, actually, some stages do feature rotating things. Nothing has been left out. So, could the Neo Geo do this game? No. No, absolutely it could not. Could the Super Nintendo? Nope. Well, maybe it could with the Super FX2 chip, but we've never seen it handle this many things simultaneously, or things this large. I'd certainly love to see it try just out of curiosity. The special effects in this one are courtesy of this genius, John O'Brien of Malibu Interactive. He understood how to get this kind of performance out of the system, something even its designers seemed clueless on. Unfortunately, the game is too hard for you. Yes, you specifically. You can't beat this without cheating. You're not good enough. Don't feel bad though, not many people on the planet are. I do wish that the game were more enjoyable to play, but special effects like these were why I was excited for the Sega CD in the first place. Far too few games took advantage of these special features, and far fewer even bothered to use them well. While we're here, let's also take a quick look at the Sega CD version of The Adventures of Batman and Robin. This one is based on the cartoon and features only driving levels. The graphics don't look quite as nice as Batman Returns, but I think that's largely because of the artwork and the color palette they chose. But it's all still very, very impressive. Buildings still have sides that exist in 3D space. Even the bridge suspenders have 3D sides to them. Next time you drive across a bridge in real life, think about the adventures of Batman and Robin on the Sega CD and how it's just as good as what you're experiencing. And yes, John O'Brien is responsible for culling the performance out of the machine once again. This game is even less fun than Batman Returns, but it still kept my interest back in the day because I'm a graphics whore. Well, a special effects whore anyway. There might be a few other Sega CD games that I'll have to mention in future editions of games that push hardware limits. This next game has been suggested thousands of times, or maybe close to a dozen, I don't know, but it absolutely deserves a mention in this series of episodes. This is Thunder Force 4 for the Genesis, though in North America people know it as Lightning Force. That's right, someone at Sega of America thought it would be cute to call this Lightning Force. Hey, it wasn't cute, it was dumb. I hope you got fired. But knowing Sega of America, they probably got promoted. Anyway, it's about time I mentioned this one in a Pushing Hardware Limits episode. It completely deserves it. Thunder Force 2 was awesome. Thunder Force 3 was way better. But Thunder Force 3 was also very short and easy, just like never mind. Well, Thunder Force 4 here compensates for all of that. Hell, the boss of the first stage alone is harder than all of the bosses in Thunder Force 3 combined. Don't worry too much though, even though the game is really tough, it is quite doable. The premise is still the same, shoot enemies and don't die. If you follow both of these steps carefully, you can beat the game. This one is a lot longer than the previous entries in the series, as it has 10 stages and they're longer stages as well. Halfway through the game, your ship gets a mod. This lets a beam charge up when you're not firing for a powerful attack that looks like it kind of hurts. I love how your ship recoils when you fire it. Each stage has an assistant manager in the middle that you'll have to fight, as well as an end boss. Technosoft went all out on this game and they pushed the console much harder than they ever have before. First of all, they went absolutely nuts with the parallax scrolling. The first stage here is often cited as an example of fantastic parallax scrolling on the console. I mean, just look at all of these layers. The graphics all over are outstanding. Excellent enemy designs and great use of color as well. Hell, they even made a boring space stage look awesome. Unless they're shooters, space stages are usually just black with a few scrolling dots here and there. But no, Technosoft decided that real artwork would be a nice touch. The bosses are always large and sometimes have many different segments that need to be destroyed before you can wear them down and finally kill them. Even the high score input screen has 3 different musical selections depending on how well you did, and you can even control the direction that you're flying through the stars. They pay so much attention to everything here. The action is always intense, and you can tell when it pushes the console hard because it gets pretty slow. But just like the Gradius games, you're probably going to be thankful for the slowdown in a lot of these cases as it helps you avoid shots. And of course, the music is pretty neat as well. Oh, you think I'm underselling the music a bit? Yeah, I agree, I think I am, because the music here is some of the best on the console. Technosoft games always have great music, but the music in this one will turn your blood into gasoline. You're missing out if you don't listen to this one in stereo. Overall, this is a top-notch package, and somehow they managed to squeeze everything into only a wimpy 8 megs. That alone is pretty incredible. Here's Soulcalibur III on the PlayStation 2 from Namco. This was originally only a PlayStation 2 exclusive. The GameCube and Xbox were both just so pathetically underpowered to handle this beacon of graphical mastery. In fact, if you take this disc and put it within 2 or 3 feet of a GameCube or an Xbox, they'll break. This is a one-on-one fighting game where the object is to win instead of lose. This certainly is far from my favorite game in the series, but it's still lots of fun. I think the fact that it was limited to the PlayStation 2 kind of made me think that it was a weaker entry, especially after the amazing Soulcalibur 2. But believe it or not, this one still really holds its own despite being limited to the most lackluster hardware of the big 3 platforms of the time. The backgrounds look outstanding and are fully 3D modeled. As far as PlayStation 2 fighting game backgrounds go, these here are only bested by Tekken 5. And the only reason for that really is that the flat ground that the characters fight on here seem a bit plain in comparison. The character models are all incredibly detailed as well. Everything is locked at 60 frames per second, and I haven't seen it drop any frames during actual gameplay. But then again, I could just be stupid. To top it all off, the game has a progressive scan mode as well as a widescreen mode, both of which you're looking at here. On the audio sides of things, there's not much new here that stands out. Both of the previous games had more interesting music all around, but what's here is still very pleasant. We also have a few Dolby Pro Logic modes to decode the stereo signal into surround. Lastly, it's a THX certified game. What in the flying hell does that mean? Well, basically THX would have people who consult during development of the game on studio acoustics and make sure there's consistent picture and sound quality throughout. Do I personally think that helped this game in any perceivable way? No, I do not. This was back when THX would cash a check from anybody. It was after THX was sold mostly to Creative Labs. They weren't worth much at the time, as Creative only paid $8 million for their 60% share of the company. But hey, some game companies and maybe even some consumers thought it was cool to have a THX logo on a game, so it happened from time to time. Soulcalibur III here would later be released to the arcades with bug fixes and some rebalancing. Trust me, the game greatly benefited from that rebalancing. The PlayStation 2 version here is still excellent, with fun gameplay and very impressive visuals and sound for the console.
You win.
And here we have Prehistoric Man on the Game Boy from...
Did you just say tits?
Yeah, so this one is an action platformer which had versions on the real consoles. But as so often happened, a Game Boy version was made as well. You're a caveman who can jump, attack with his club, and collect things. The object of the game is to complete it. Unfortunately, the collision detection isn't very fun, mainly because you have a giant hitbox. It just doesn't feel right. You can tell us by Western developers. So yeah, this isn't a particularly good game, but that's not why we're here today, is it? No, we're here for the parallax scrolling that rivals 16-bit consoles. Almost. This really is quite good for a Game Boy title. It overlaps in all directions as it moves. No herky-jerky weirdness of poorly animated background tiles, nor flicker which would be caused if they had used sprites for one of the layers. The truth is that this is done by animating and adjusting certain background tiles to give it the illusion of depth, which is why the far background doesn't seem to have much detail. This eats up a lot of memory, because each of those tiles back there need to have versions with the graphics in any one of up to 64 different positions to provide the proper illusion. The total number of tile variations is probably way lower in 64 in this case, but it still needs to be high enough to give it a smooth look when scrolling. And then each tile needs to be programmed correctly so that the game knows which one to display when. It takes a lot of effort to do this, and yes, it is very much appreciated. But you know what else takes a lot of effort? Making a game that's fun to play. Sadly, they could have put more effort into that part of the game, but overall, it's still quite impressive. And there you go, more games that push hardware limits. How do you feel about that? Is it cruel to ask consoles to go beyond what was originally envisioned for them? I mean, consoles are people too. Anyway, horrible jokes aside, what are some games that you feel push console limits, and how do they push them? Let me know. In the meantime, thank you for watching GameSat. Hello, and welcome to Literacy Corner. In today's episode, we're going to be reading this SNK Neo Geo ad that appeared in this August 1991 issue of Premiere Magazine. So grab your copy of Premiere Magazine August 1991 and read along. I remember when he couldn't keep his hands off me. Now he's got that Neo Geo. He used to play all night with me. Hot action, fantasy games, you name it. Now he says his Neo Geo gives him more. plus Major League Sports, Ninja Warriors, and flame-throwing enemies. Can you do that? He asks. I make my play, but he's glued to the Neo Geo's vivid four-dimensional graphics. Four-dimensional graphics! And 65,000 colors. I scream, but he doesn't hear me above the 15 channels of pure pulsating stereo sound with 7 dedicated to real voice speech. He says Neo Geo is the most powerful home entertainment system in the world, and that other systems don't even come close. And lately, neither does he. I'll show him. I'll play that Neo Geo and beat the pants off him. SNK Home Entertainment, Inc. For more information, or the name of your local Neo Geo dealer, call 1-800-800-NEO-GEO-X403. The trademarks of Neo Geo are registered by SNK Home Entertainment, Inc. Thank you for watching Literacy Corner.